Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So September 27, 2021, in Hillsborough, North Carolina, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 29, Text 12. Shri Pariksit Uvacha Krishnam Vidu Param Kantam Natu Brahma Tayamune Guna Pravaho Paramas Tasam Guna Diyam Katam. Please chant. Anybody else? Lead. Shri Pariksit Uvasha. Shri Pariksit said, Krishnam, Lord Krishna, Viduhu, they knew, Param, only, Kantam, as their beloved, Na, not, to, but, Brahmataya, as the absolute truth, Mune, O sage Shukadev, Guna, of the three modes of material nature, Pravaha, of the mighty current, Uparamaha, the cessation, Tasam, for them, Gunadiyam, whose mentality was caught up in those modes. Katam, how? BBT translation, Shri Pariksit Maharaj said, O sage, the gopis knew Krishna only as their lover, not as the supreme absolute truth. So how could these girls, their minds caught up in the waves of the modes of nature, free themselves from material attachment? Because that was the previous verse. Previous verse was, they only knew Krishna as their lover, not as the supreme Lord, but they attained liberation. BBT purport. King Pariksit was sitting in an assembly of great sages and other important personalities, listening to the words of Sukadev Goswami. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, as Sukadev began speaking of the gopis' conjugal love for Krishna, the king noticed the expressions on the faces of some of the more materialistic persons present there and realized the doubt lurking in their hearts. So what was he doing? He was paying attention, right? And he was paying attention to body language. Therefore, although the king thoroughly knew the purport of Sukadev's words, he presented himself as experiencing personal doubt so he could eradicate the doubt of others. That is why he asked this question. Okay, I want to look at Srila Prabhupada's explanation in Krishna book. Maharaj Parikshit heard Sukadeva Goswami explain the situation of the gopis who assembled with Krishna in the rasa dance. When he heard that some of the gopis, simply by concentrating on Krishna as their paramour, became freed from all contamination of material birth and death, he said, quote, "The gopis did not know that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They accepted him as a beautiful boy and considered him to be their paramour. So how was it possible for them to get freed from the material condition just by thinking of a paramour," unquote. One should consider here that Krishna and ordinary living beings are qualitatively one. The ordinary living beings, being part and parcel of Krishna, are also Brahman, but Krishna is the supreme Para-Brahman. The question is, if it is possible for a devotee to get free from the material, contaminated stage simply by thinking of Krishna, then why should this not be possible for others who are also thinking of someone? If one is thinking of a husband or son, or if anyone at all is thinking of another living entity, then, since all living entities are also Brahman, why are all those who thus think of others not free from the contaminated stage of material nature? This is a very intelligent question, because there are always atheists imitating Krishna. In these days of Kali Yuga, there are many rascals who think themselves to be as good as Krishna and who cheat people into believing that thinking of them is as good as thinking of Lord Krishna. Parikshit Maharaj, apprehending the future dangerous condition. So here Prabhupada is saying that Maharaj Parikshit is thinking of the future. Parikshit Maharaj, apprehending the future dangerous condition of blind followers, of demoniac imitators, therefore asked this question. And fortunately, it is recorded in Srimad Bhagavatam to warn innocent people that thinking of an ordinary man and thinking of Krishna are not the same. Actually, even thinking of the demigods cannot compare with thinking of Krishna. It is warned in the Vaishnava Tantra that one who puts Vishnu, Narayana, or Krishna on the same level as the demigods is called a pasandi or rascal. Iprikit uvacha Krishnam viduparam kantam na tu brahma dayamune guna pravahoparamas tasam guna diyam katam. Shri Parikshit Maharaj said, "O sage, the gopis knew Krishna only as their lover, not as the supreme absolute truth. So how could these girls, their minds caught up in the waves of the modes of nature, free themselves from material attachment?" Just a little side note, I'm not going to be reading other tikas, but you might want to look later at Sanatana Goswami's and Jiva's, because they give other ways of understanding this verse, particularly in terms of guna and Brahman, particularly in terms of this guna dhyam, meditating on the gunas can also be understood as meditating on Krishna's qualities, but we're not going to look at that right now. So this touches on something that's very dear to me, and that is the austerities of speech that Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita. So does anyone know the 5 austerities of speech? So truthfulness, pleasing, beneficial, regularly reciting the Vedic literature, and not agitating to others. Priyam is the message should be pleasing, not agitating to others, or the words should be pleasing. In modern society, people use very agitating words, don't they? A lot of curse words and emotionally agitating words. So of those 5, what's the most important? Truthful, you say. All right. But I remember one time seeing a mother with a newborn baby, and her baby looked like a little piglet. And she said, look at my cute little baby. So if I were truthful, I would have said, that baby looks like a little piglet. So what's the most important of the 5? Beneficial. Beneficial. And we find, of course, that there's offenses involved with speaking truthful things that are not beneficial. Like one of the offenses is to preach the glories of the holy name to the faithless. In other words, you're speaking something truthful, but it's not appropriate. Right? And Jesus says something very similar. He says, don't give what to what? Don't give pearls in front of the pigs. They'll just trample it. They'll just crush them. So there's appropriateness in speaking. And this needs to be understood both when we're preaching and when we're hearing the preaching of others. All right. So one should always consider one's audience. Now, the way Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes this is that Maharaj Parikshit is looking at the audience right there, the other sages that are there. He's looking around, he's noticing. So he's not just absorbed in hearing from Sukadeva. He's also noticing, he's paying attention. And he's noticing other people look disturbed right now. And this is one of our duties as a teacher, whether we're speaking one-on-one or whether we're speaking to a large crowd. I've seen people give class with their eyes closed the whole time. You ever seen that? And sometimes they'll be just like this the whole time. But you want to notice, this is one of the difficulties we have with our Zoom preaching. You know, a lot of times people are just a black rectangle. I mean, you don't even know if they're there. Like, maybe they've gone outside to talk to their friends and they're not even there. But you want to notice, how are people responding? Many years ago in London, it was the appearance or disappearance day of Madhvacharya, and I spent, I don't know, at least a week preparing for that class, researching Madhvacharya's philosophy. And as I'm speaking the class, within 10 minutes in, I could see everybody was like deer in the headlights, you know. I forget it. I'm not going to talk about Madhvacharya's philosophy. I talked about something else. So one has to gauge one's present audience. But Srila Prabhupada's saying that Maharaj Parikshit was not just thinking of the present audience, he was thinking of future. Because the Bhagavatam is in writing. So here we are, 5,000 years later, hearing it. Now, he can't see our faces, but we might be thinking, huh? How is that possible? So he's asking a question for both. And we have that situation, right? Like this class I'm giving right now is being recorded. I'm recording it. It's being recorded on Facebook, on Mayapur TV. That means that people separated by space and time are going to be able to hear this class, right? I mean, it kind of shocked me when I first started traveling to go to places I'd never been and meet people who told me that they regularly listen to my classes. It's like, I don't even know you. And to remember that, you know, that this is going also, it's spreading in space and time. And this is true for anything that's written or anything that's recorded. And he's thinking in the future, somebody will misuse this. And they'll say, well, the gopis thought about their paramour in this parakya bhav. So, you know, I'll start a rasa dance. I'm also Brahman. Krishna's Brahman, I'm Brahman. I'll start a rasa dance with other people's wives, and they'll also become free of the modes of material nature. So I thought I should ask this question for them. So I was thinking about some examples. Today is the day Srila Prabhupada arrived in America, and he wrote this poem to please make my words understandable for these people covered by the modes of passion and ignorance. Right? And Srila Prabhupada would present things according to the audience. Like he wrote that book, the first book I read of Srila Prabhupada was Easy Journey to Other Planets. And he's talking about, the anti-material particle, trying to put things in terms that people can understand. And he's presenting things according to his audience. So those of us who regularly read Srila Prabhupada's books and regularly listen to Srila Prabhupada's classes and conversations, I'm sure you've noticed that there are many topics in Srila Prabhupada's books that he either never talks about in a lecture or only touches on. So he has far more, we could say, esoteric, intimate topics in his books than he discusses in his lectures. Right? Have you noticed that? That Prabhupada in his lectures generally, almost always, is preaching on a more basic level than what he talks about in his books. Sometimes there's an exception. And then conversations are really geared toward the person. And Jayadvaita Swami makes the point that conversations are the most tricky pramana because we can't see, you may be looking at something in the room or outside, and it sounds like you're referencing the previous sentence, but you're not. You're actually referencing something else. For those of you who know grammar, the antecedents of your pronouns are not clear in a conversation. When you're writing something, you make a point to clarify, but in speaking, we're often clarifying it by where we look or where we point or what's happening in our environment. And the conversations are very tailored to particular people. Right? Same with letters. I remember one devotee giving a class saying how Prabhupada told one devotee who had stopped chanting 16 rounds, well, just chant for 1 hour every morning before you go to work. And he said, well, chanting 16 rounds in an hour, it probably wasn't 16 rounds. And this devotee was presenting this as Prabhupada's standard instruction for people who weren't chanting their rounds. But that same month, in another letter, Srila Prabhupada wrote to a devotee who had stopped chanting his rounds, move into the ashram, give up everything else and chant 64 rounds a day, and I'm going to write a separate letter to the temple president telling him that I want you to do this. And then I was thinking about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Srila Prabhupada often gives him as an example of adjusting for the audience. That for people in general, what was he doing? Sankirtan. For people in general. And deep philosophy he's discussing with people like Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And when is he discussing details of rasa? With Ramananda Roy, with Swarup Damodar. Of course, I make this point all the time. This is recorded in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and we're out at the airports giving these books to the public. I mean, that always strikes me as really like, woo! That here Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he's leaving these for the, like where you're reading right now, you're reading the Hera Panchami section, yes? Yes, and what you're reading there from the Hera Panchami between Srivas Thakur and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is a lot of things that are referenced in Ujjwala Nilamani. And Ujjwala Nilamani it's like the next step after Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. It's going into all of the different elements that make up rasa, the stimulants or the vibhavas, the voluntary actions of the anubhavas, the involuntary actions of the sattvika bhavas, all the different waves of emotions, the vyabhichari bhavas, and all the varieties of relationships that the gopis and the queens can have with Krishna. So this is a very elevated subject matter, and yet it's in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which we're going out. I mean, I used to regularly go out and distribute it to people in Walmart. Just think of your average Walmart shopper. We would distribute it to them, right? Where do you work? No. Where do you work? Food Line? Yeah. So When you're at Food Lion, would you think that most people in the store could understand Ujjwala Nilamani? No. But that's what we're giving them. Or Nectar Devotion, Prabhupada published in 1969, so that's quite interesting. Of course, what Srila Prabhupada did in these books was he mixed rasa and tattva all the time. Yes, just like what I just read from Krishna book, where Prabhupada goes into this explanation how the soul is Brahman, but Krishna is Param Brahman, and Krishna is God, Krishna is God. He's like screaming it at us all the time. Krishna is God, Krishna is God, Krishna is God. Whereas we look at a lot of the books of the acharyas that were not really meant for public distribution. And they don't say that. You can read a whole book of Leela by one of our acharyas that never anywhere in the book says that Krishna is God, isn't it? Like nowhere. And you could see that people would become confused. And then I was thinking about Krishna. Nice to think about Krishna every once in a while. But I was thinking about Krishna in regards to this. The way when Krishna speaks, when Krishna is giving instruction. Now, of course, when Krishna is giving instruction, one of the ways in which he accounts for the audience is that his instructions is in layers. You think of like something layered, like a cabbage maybe? Pulling off the different layers. Right? And so what it looks like, or coconut is a good example. So you got the hard outer shell, and then you have the firm stuff of the coconut, and then you have the liquid of the coconut. And so it's understood differently by different people. And Krishna does this all the time. He does this in the words that are recorded in Scripture, and he does it in his leelas. We'll have some leela where, Jatila comes and finally finds this Radharani ready to worship the sun god, which is what she sent her to the forest to do, but she's been there for hours and hours and hours. Well, how come you haven't come home? Well, I couldn't find a priest, right? And then Madhu Mangal shows up as the priest. And Krishna shows up in disguise, and he's saying all these things that Jatila is hearing one way, and Radharani and her friends are hearing another way. Yes? So he's speaking simultaneously. We talk about multitasking, right? So he's speaking simultaneously on different levels to different people, and we find this when we read the Shastra ourselves. Isn't that a fact? The first time I read Bhagavad Gita, I was a 17-year-old college student. And so I understood it at a particular level. And every time I read the Bhagavad Gita, I find more things there. Yes? Does that happen to everybody? It's not like, oh yeah, I already read that. Oh yeah, I already read that. There's something else packed in there, and something else packed in there, and that goes on forever. But Krishna also adjusts for the particular time, place, and circumstance. Like he's saying, to Nanda Maharaj, no, what can God do? Just worship your work. Right? That's rather extraordinary. It's not a general instruction. Or even different parts of the Bhagavad Gita, where, Arjuna keeps insisting, I don't want to fight, 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 I don't want to fight. All right, fine. Leave your family, go to a secluded place, put down a deerskin, stare at your nose, chant Om. Right? Fine, do it. Sometimes we do this. Someone's really insisting to do something that we know isn't going to work for them. And we try to talk them out of it, and it doesn't work. And finally we say, you know what? I actually think it's a really good idea. Why don't you just go and do it? Because we know that if they try it, they'll find it. Arjuna just tried it on mentally, and he said, Chanchalahi Krishna, I don't think this is going to work for me. He said, what happens to someone who tries this and fails? What's their destination? Aren't they like a riven cloud? So it's not that we're all meant to do that. It's not that although Krishna gave that instruction, that we're all meant to sit on deerskin and stare at our nose and eat the forest berries, and even though that's Krishna's instruction at a particular place. So that means not only should we be careful of our own preaching, how we're presenting Krishna consciousness to whom and where and under what circumstances, but we should also be careful when we're reading or hearing. And I wanted to reference one of our main hermeneutical tools. This is a Vedic hermeneutical tool of asking 4 questions about anything that we hear or read. Because it's very, 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 very common that somebody will take one statement from Srila Prabhupada or one statement in the scriptures and say, oh, that's it. That's absolutely true for everybody all the time. Like right now, I'm reading in the 9th canto, which is all these really strange stories in the 9th canto. There's one about this king, I forget his name, and he was asked to kill some demons. He said, I'll only do it if I can ride on Indra, which Indra didn't like that idea. He said, I'm not going to carry anybody around. But he was persuaded, so, all right. So Indra became the carrier. He took another form. I think he took the form of a bull. So this guy's riding on Indra, who looks like a bull, and he kills all these demons that he was asked to kill by a sage. Can't remember the name of the sage. And then he took the demons' wealth and the demons' wives and gave them to Indra. So I'm reading this and I'm like, this is shocking. This is like totally shocking that he's taking these demons' wives and giving them to Indra. I was like, what? And there's no commentary, there's no nothing. You know, so we could read that and say, oh, you know, we're supposed to take the women as, you know, booty in a military campaign. It's right there in the Bhagavatam. Or one of my favorites is where Prabhupada said that sannyas should be absolutely outlawed. One of my favorites. Because people like to take quotes of other things Prabhupada said should be absolutely outlawed. And, you know, 3 months later, Srila Prabhupada initiated Bhakti True Swami into sannyas. So people like to take these things, right? And, well, this is my cherry-pick quote, and this is my cherry-pick quote. But it's not the way it works, because the vast majority of the time, people are preaching with time, place, circumstance, and person in mind. There are some statements that are not like that. There are some statements that are meant for everybody, at all places, at all times, in all circumstances, always. Like, love God. That's always true. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what planet you're on, it doesn't matter what universe you're on, that's always true. But other things are adapted. All right, so these questions. First question, who is it for? This statement, who is it for? What are the qualifications of the audience when the statement is being made? In scripture, by the acharyas, by our guru. Next statement is, what is it about? So the abhideya. The next question, what's the prayojana? What's the phala? What's the purpose? What's it trying to achieve? And the last question is sambandha. How does it go about achieving what it's trying to achieve? What's the relationship between the subject of the text and the text itself? So I wanted to give some examples from our hermeneutics course. So one example I've already talked about is when Krishna is talking about worshiping work. So he says, because it is karma, this is Bhagavatam 10:24, 17 to 18, because it is karma that causes the conditioned living entity to accept and then give up different high and low grade material bodies. This karma is his enemy, friend, and neutral witness, his spiritual master and controlling Lord. Therefore, one should seriously worship work itself. A person should remain in the position corresponding to his nature and should perform his own duty. Indeed, that by which we may live nicely is really our worshipful duty. All right, who was this spoken to? Nanda Maharaj and the other cowherd men. So what's their adhikar? What's their qualifications? They're Vaishnavas. Are they ready to hear about prema bhakti? Are they qualified to hear about prema bhakti? Definitely, right? But on the other hand, they have a position with Krishna under Yogamaya, where they think Krishna is their kid. Right? They think Krishna's their kid. So they have this kind of a little bit of simplicity because of this. Yes? So what is this about? It's about worshiping Govardhan, right? Krishna's trying to get them to worship Govardhan. And why? What's Krishna's purpose? Huh? I'm sorry? To teach Indra a lesson, yes. To teach Indra a lesson, to stop demigod worship, and for them to see Govardhan as himself. So these are his purposes. Now, how does he go about teaching what he's teaching? So he's doing this in a very unusual way. He's denigrating the highest philosophy and instead apparently teaching something atheistic. It's not direct teaching, it's indirect and hidden. So the relationship between the overall text of the Bhagavatam and these specific texts is also very unusual. Because Bhagavatam throws out all cheating religion. But at face value, these texts are promoting atheism. But the texts do lead to the highest purpose of the Bhagavatam because they bring the residents of Vrindavan directly into worship of Krishna and Govardhan Hill. So they're in accord with the teachings of the Bhagavatam while seeking to contradict it. All right, we're going to give one more example. This is from 8, 9, 9, 10. The Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form of Mohini told the demons, "O sons of Kasyapa Muni, I am only a prostitute. How is it that you have so much faith in me? A learned person never puts faith in a woman. O demons, as monkeys, jackals, and dogs are unsteady in their sexual relationships and want newer and newer friends every day. Women who live independently seek new friends daily. Friendship with such a woman is never permanent. This is the opinion of learned scholars." All right, who is her audience? The demons. What's their adhikar? What's their qualification? Ignorance. They're full of what qualities? Lust, anger, envy, greed, arrogance, deceit. What's it about? Cheating them. It's about the distribution of the nectar. So it's about the distribution of the nectar and the unsteadiness of unchaste women. So why? What's the purpose? She's trying to get the demons to do what? To her. It's interesting. She's paradoxically trying to get them to trust her. By saying, "Don't trust me," she's trying to get them to trust her. So how does it go about teaching what it's teaching? So this is also interesting. Mohini did intend to cheat the demons. That was her intention, was to cheat them. And she's revealing in truthfulness what she will do. She's saying, "You can't trust me. I'm going to cheat you." However, it's presented so the demons will think it's sarcastic and trust her even more than they would have otherwise. It's teaching about the psychology of demoniac beings much more than teaching about the nature of women. Now, both of these examples that I've given are related to another hermeneutic tool. Some statements in Shastra are intentionally delusive or obscure, whereas others are direct. So whenever we're hearing or reading anything, we want to consider these four things. Who's the audience? What's their qualification? Right? What is their qualification? What is being said here? What's its ultimate purpose? And what's its method of teaching? Right? Then we can understand the actual import, the actual meaning. And there's going to be many. There's not going to be just, I have found the one meaning. Prabhupada said we should look at every verse from many, many angles of vision, because there are many, 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 many angles. It's not just understood in one way. As I was saying, if you look at the tikas of Sanatana and Jiva, they analyze this verse in about 5 different ways. So, even if you're looking at just how you're going to translate a verse or how you're going to understand the direct meaning of the verse, that's going to be in many different ways. Now, of course, just briefly, this is going to be in tomorrow's class, but I just wanted to briefly say the question before us here is about tattva and rasa. That generally, we think that in order to, janma karma jame divyam eva myo veti tattvataha, tvaktvadeham punarjama naitimam eti sorjuna. Generally, we think one has to understand the tattva of Krishna in order to become liberated. But here, in this case, the gopis are not understanding, at least in this moment, they're not understanding the tattva of Krishna. They're simply attached to Krishna as their lover, and that alone is liberating them. Because that is also sufficient. But generally, in our preaching, we want to also have people understand the tattva. We risk having people make offenses if all we present is the rasa aspect of God. They'll think God is an ordinary man, or they'll think that he's licentious, or something like that. And therefore we find that Srila Prabhupada does this interweaving of rasa and tattva. For those who've already thoroughly understood tattva, that can recede to the background, and they can be just absorbed in rasa, like the gopis are. But to ordinary persons, it may seem, how is it possible that they can be liberated? So whenever whether we're speaking to one person or whether we're speaking to thousands, whether we're looking at the present, whether it's something recorded or written that's going into future, to always think of what will be beneficial. How can I present things in such a way that people will actually make advancement in Krishna consciousness and not commit offenses? And this is important whether we're writing something on social media, whether we're sitting in a Bhagavatam class. Sri Arjuna was saying to me the other day about social media, you have no idea who the audience is when you're putting something out there. He said, you have to be so careful. You have no idea. It's going to the whole planet. And also how we understand the words of the Supreme Lord and the words of the Acharyas. So questions, comments? Yes, Maharaj. Indirectly, it's tough. But specifically, Sukadeva Goswami said they're not understanding that he's Brahman. So. He's understanding he's the Purusha and their Prakriti, which is tough. Yes, thank you. No, don't be sorry. It's my hubris that I dare to speak in your presence about anything. So why should you be sorry? I should just keep my mouth shut. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.